Welcome to Job Sharing and Beyond, the Future of Work podcast that goes beyond the traditional 9 to 5. I am Karen Tischler, speaker, consultant, and host of the show, where we hear from global experts every other week to discover innovative solutions and tips on how to remain a relevant employer in the future. I am delighted to have John Adams as my guest today. John is a stay-at-work-from-home dad. He started blogging about his experiences shortly after becoming a stay-at-home dad in 2011. His blog, Dadbloguk, is a leading UK-based parenting, fatherhood, men's interest, and lifestyle blog. Blogging highlights include interviewing, among others, Malala's dad, Michael Douglas, and Steve Carell, as well as working with Movember. The blog has won many awards, among others, the Best Dad Blog at the 2019 Online Influence Awards, as well as the European Parenting Blogs Award 2019. John has spoken at many conferences and has made regular media appearances across TV, radio, print, and online media. He recently has been selected as a LinkedIn Changemaker. We will be talking about this more in our conversation. Thank you so much, John, for coming onto my show today.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on, Karen.
So we have a lot of people from all over the world listening in. Could you tell us where you are calling in from, and in your area, what is like your favorite food, or is there a particular site in your area that would be very interesting for people to know about?
Okay, well, I'm calling in from the United Kingdom, which, as we all know, until a few months ago, was part of the European Union. And I'm actually calling in from England, and I'm well, these days I live in Surrey, so right underneath London, which I assume most of your listeners will know of. Favourite food? Well, of course, being British, I don't eat any British food. No British people do. I think favourite would have to be Indian food, curry, which most Brits would eat morning, noon, night. As for special sites around this area, well, within Surrey itself, that I can think of some, but really I'm so close to London, I would probably suggest something like the Tower of London, or the Greenwich Museum. And once they're open up again, once social distancing is a thing of the past, I would definitely recommend the Natural History and Science Museums in London, which are just absolute classics.
Thank you so much. I remember a long time ago when I was living in London, I really loved going to these museums. And it's funny, I'm actually, calling you from Surrey as well, but Surrey, Canada.
Surrey, Vancouver, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And now, you started as a dad blogger in 2012, and you wrote your book, A Modern Father and a Dad Blogger, a couple of years later. Could you please tell us more about how this all started?
Well, the blog started because I became the main carer for my children in 2011. I mean, it's a very simple story, to be honest with you. My wife's career was taking off. I wasn't particularly happy in my job. We had the one daughter at the time. Mm-hmm. She was going to school, so she was going to nursery, so kindergarten, obviously. Mm-hmm. She was going to kindergarten. She was in 5 days a week. And we'd missed a couple of the significant moments, like first steps, because it happened in childcare.
Okay.
Weren't particularly happy with that. And so I suggested to my wife that actually I give up work and concentrate on family and home, and she carries on working full time, which is what we did. I mean, interestingly, I can say this years later, I did, as I say, I worked part-time. I didn't give up work completely, but other people started calling me a stay-at-home dad. As soon as I started working part-time, I got called a stay-at-home dad so often, the label just stuck. It was actually about another 3 years before I actually gave up work altogether. But after about a year of doing this, being the main carer for Helen, I noticed I was being invited to mother and toddler groups. I saw commercials for people advertising for jobs for stay-at-home mums, which under British law is actually illegal. You cannot advertise jobs based on gender. And it just happened once too often, and I thought, right, I'm going to start blogging about this, because I used to be a journalist. So I started blogging about it, initially just a sort of rant about the casual sexism that I faced as a man who was primarily doing the childcare at home. And you're absolutely right. After a while, I thought, I'm missing a trick here. Maybe I should look into publishing a book. And totally out of the blue, I was approached by a micro publisher, someone who published a few books, and she asked me if I would write a book. Excuse me. This is where the story goes slightly wrong, actually. Unfortunately, she had some family issues, and she had to pull out of the project when I had the book, or what I thought I had the book, sort of 90% written. And so I was left kind of thinking, oh dear, what do I do with this? So I decided to go ahead and self-publish, which I did. And yeah, I mean, what was very interesting was I will not be retiring. I've seen the nice condos you have in Vancouver. Okay, I will not be retiring and living in one of them soon, based on book sales. But when I published the book, interestingly, because it wasn't so much big a stay-at-home dad, it got me masses of media coverage. I mean, without actually doing that, my blog wouldn't be where it is now. But sorry, Karen, that's a really long answer.
No. But it actually, thank you so much. It really leads well into the next question I have, because basically, I was a stay-at-home mom myself for 11 years. And I'm a very, very strong believer that more widely spread flexible working methods could really help more people to stay in the professional world, as well as also more easily return from unpaid care work. And so, as I was reading your book, I was very curious to know how you got to interview the Deputy Prime Minister at the time, Nick Clegg, about the government's stance on flexible working, and how you got involved in some occasional policy discussion about fathers and equality.
Yeah, well, in some respects, there was a bit of luck there. It all came about with a contact or two I had made on Twitter, who at the time, I should say hello, Tim, if you listen to this, Tim Lloyd, great guy. He was working at the time for the government communication department, and he was doing some work with Jo Swinson, who she's certainly within the UK. She probably has got quite a reasonable profile internationally as well. She was a government equalities minister, and she had the main responsibility actually for introducing shared parental leave in the UK, which I know you have in Canada. Right. You in Canada, you've had it longer, especially in Quebec. I know it's been a real success in Quebec. Shared parental leave has been, as I say, Canada been in longer than it has in Britain. We had it. It started in the UK in 2015. Okay. Now, Jo Swinson and I had some dealings with each other. I went to some meetings with her to discuss various issues, and with also a deputy of hers, policy discussions. I can't really tell you what was discussed, but there were various things were discussed there. But and then Nick Clegg was doing this event with Deloitte, the professional services firm, and sort of through that connection, I was invited to go and speak to Nick Clegg. And the interesting thing was, he was very, very candid about shared parental leave, because we have not introduced the best system in Britain. We've basically introduced a system that the Swedes introduced 40 years ago.
Right.
Which is essentially transferable maternity leave. So essentially it's on paper, this isn't how it works, but practically the leave is given to the mother and the mother can almost decide how much the father should have.
Okay.
Which I know in the Canadian provinces, some provinces in the various Canadian states, you have different shared parental leases. I just happen to know that one in Quebec is a particularly good one. And we need to go down the Quebec line, basically,
right.
Which we haven't got there yet. But so yes, it was through my contact with Joe Sweetson.
Okay. And so now in your book, you wrote, one of the things I've noticed when I became a dad was how flexible you have to be. It is essential that you adapt as your children grow and their needs change. I strongly believe that transferable business skills that one learns as an unpaid care worker are completely undervalued in the business setting. And now when you look at like the World Economic Forum and the soft skills that they say are becoming more and more important, especially in the times of AI, I think these skills are, becoming even more important. And so could you share some of these transferable skills that you learned from being a stay-at-home dad?
Well, I think actually I would go a step further. There's actually an Italian company called Life-Based Value who are now actually, they're almost like a qualification provider, and they are running a qualification that and they've done it very well. So you can do it as a father, you can do it as a mother, and you basically they used to call it a master's in mother.
A master, right? It's Riccarda, right? Riccarda.
Yes, that's right.
Yes,
yes. Yes, I can't remember the lady's second name, but you're absolutely right. I think, which is something that I hadn't really thought about a great deal until I was introduced to life-based value. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the skills you have to as a father, or indeed as a mother, I don't think there's a difference. You've got a flexibility, patience. Anyone will tell you negotiation skills. Oh my word, negotiation skills. You've got all sorts of social skills that you have to pick up. I'm going to say timekeeping, although I think parents are generally dreadful timekeepers. Tolerance, understanding is a huge one. I think when you start getting introduced to other people's families and the family situations they come from when they have children.
Right.
So I think there's a huge number of soft skills that you do learn. And actually, I'm going to give you just another viewpoint on this with the whole corona issue, because obviously around the world, schools have been shut.
Yes. And
there's been huge focus, quite rightly, on the mental health impacts it's going to have on children.
Right.
Which I think is something we have to keep in mind, and I think that's very true. I also think that children during this era, okay, so they've had a lot of screen time. Come on, let's face it, we've all had to work at the same time. But actually, there's huge scope for children to have picked up a huge number of soft skills during this era.
Yes.
And it's we've obviously got to look at the mental health of children, the emotional health of children as well. But I think during Corona time, as I tend to call it, kids have actually same things: understanding, tolerance, timekeeping, self-reliance. I'm not telling you it's some panacea, but I think children will probably get a lot more out of this than we realise.
Yeah. I think so too. And like just life skills as a whole, right? When you think about from gardening to baking to all of these things that they typically would not have done. So I think it really will serve them very well in the future when they look back. And Yeah, and I try to make a point with my own children to really focus on the positive things
Mhm.
that they are experiencing, to make them realize, yes, it is a dreadful situation for everybody.
Mhm.
Also, it is giving them a unique situation where 10, 20, 30 years from now, they look back and say, oh, the reason I am knowledgeable or I have that skill is because of COVID. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I fully agree.
yeah. And I think the other thing as a father, actually, I would say there's there is huge focus on what men are like with their children when they become fathers. It's actually something I find slightly irritating. We don't actually, as a society, in the Western world, I would say, actually look at what the contribution fathers make and the needs of fathers when their children are in their later school years,
Hmm.
or middle and later school years.
Right.
And when it comes to flexibility, I've got one child at the moment who is in the UK. We would say she's in year 2 at school, about to go into year 3. So she's 7, she's about to turn 8. My eldest
Okay.
daughter is Helen. She's 11, so she's
Hmm.
actually going to high school in September.
Okay.
And the two children at two completely different developmental stages, and having to deal with that, be it as a mother or as a father, but everybody
Hmm.
always thinks that mums are dealing with all of this stuff. Actually, dads do it too. And if you're well, these days I'm a work from home dad, but for a father like myself, it's on me to deal with that. You have to be flexible in dealing with those
Yeah.
situations.
No, I really appreciate that. And it's it's interesting that you say, like, a lot of the times people have still this misperception that there are just very few, if any, stay-at-home dads, because they might not have ever met anybody. And so when I talked to a stay-at-home dad here in Vancouver, he actually said to me, please do not forget about us, because he told me about how in his early years he would be the only person, the only dad in a mom and baby group gathering. And he said over the years it had become that it was maybe 2 or 3 dads. And so now, in your book, you had said in the financial crisis in 2008 that it created more stay-at-home dads. Have you noticed or have you heard about more dads staying at home now because of COVID? That, like, and not just like right now where everybody is like, staying at home and doing remote work, but also maybe going forward?
The short answer to that is no.
Okay.
It might be too early.
Okay, that's true.
It
Mm-hmm.
might be too early. It's interesting what you say about remote work. What I think is going to happen, I know we're going to talk about Changemakers a bit later, my LinkedIn Changemakers role, but
Yeah.
and there has been some academic research done already. The preliminary findings are just coming out now, and they are showing that fathers are doing more childcare,
Mm-hmm.
and they are, because many men are working remotely and they are now at home for the first time ever,
Right.
working hours. And it is a generally positive story that men are much more involved than they ever have been. Yes, women are still generally carrying the majority of the domestic burden, but men have never been more involved. That's the picture in the UK.
Yeah.
I suspect in nations like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, it's probably a very similar picture.
Yeah.
I dread to think what it's like south of your border, in the US.
Yeah.
That's another story.
Yeah, it's, I used to live in Arizona for 14 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, I mean, it is very difficult. Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the things, and again, sort of going back to all the time you have been a dad at home, have you noticed that people, other dads or moms who were stay-at-home parents, and they then try to return back to paid work. Have you heard any stories whether that was easy for them to do, or whether they felt like the stigma of, oh, you were just on vacation, or there is a career gap? I'm just curious if you have any personal experience there and what people did. Mm-hmm.
Gosh, I'm trying to think now. I can't think of any disaster stories.
Okay, that's good.
The only thing I'd say is that, rather like you were saying before, that there aren't that many stay-at-home fathers, and the media and the like do tend to exaggerate the number that are there. I mean, I'm sorry to have to say this, but there are not that many of us.
Okay.
I can't think of any stay-at-home dads I know. Well, no, actually, I can think of one or two who have maybe had to take a year out,
okay,
work, and then go back. For someone like myself, I mean, I last actually had an employer, so to speak. Gosh, how many years ago? 7 years ago.
Okay.
I suspect I would struggle. I mean, obviously these days I work for my own small micro business. I could maybe work as a consultant, as a freelancer, but I no, it worries me, the thought of having to go back into work. I think I would probably struggle.
You attended a couple of conferences, among others. You were in a returners panel discussion at the Flexpo Flexible Working Conference. And so, I'd be curious to learn more what, you found out there, what other panel members said about returning.
Yeah, that was a really interesting experience, because that was, as you say, it was a panel to discuss returning to work after a period of being absent from the workforce.
Right.
And I was slightly taken aback, if I can be honest, to be on this panel, on this stage, looking out, to see two men in the audience. And unfortunately, wow. I knew them both personally, and they were actually speakers in the station.
Oh my!
So it was all women, which I hate to say it, but I think that says a lot about how flexible working is viewed. Exactly. I was quite glad to actually take part in the panel discussion, though, because it did give me the opportunity to actually challenge a couple of opinions that were there. I mean, one of the things that I actually said, there was this discussion from the other panel members about how you could return to work, and obviously I was the only man on the panel, and the other women, well, some more than others, if I can be honest, were saying that what you really need is a group of supportive, like-minded friends. And actually, the woman directly to my right said that she had about 25 friends listed on a WhatsApp group, that if she needed a child picking up from kindergarten school at a moment, she could call upon them to do it and help her out. And I had to say to her that for a man, that is unthinkable. That men do not have those social connections. And what I said on stage was that what actually stay-at-home dads need is that I have been told in the past to go and make dad friends. What I actually need is mum friends. Right. Yeah. There are not, I have in the past, kind of said to men, I'm sorry, I'm up in the city, I'm not going to get back at time to school to pick up my child. Do you think you could help me out and do it for me? Your average full-time working father will just look at you like you're from another planet. Yeah. Now, that's not a criticism of the full-time working father. I think full-time working fathers do get a bad reputation and very unfairly, because actually the mental load of being a full-time working parent and providing financially for the father is present, and it is there, and there is a real genuine mental load that you feel. It's different to the mental load if you happen to be in a relationship where you are looking after the children and the home. I think we need to recognise that there are two different mental loads, and unfortunately, because men are generally the ones who go out and work full time, men are not very good at speaking up and saying, "Yes, you know what, I've got a mental load." But anyway, I've digressed. But the point I was making to this audience was, in the lightest possible way to all full-time working men, you are useless to me if I have a family crisis. The person I need to reach out for is a mum, basically. And my word, this really got the audience, even if I say myself, I mean, it really got them talking. They sort of hadn't really been confronted with this view before. But again, one of the women on the panel turned to me and said, "Well, what about WhatsApp? Why don't you use WhatsApp?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that's great. I've got to be invited onto the WhatsApp groups. In my kids' school now, I am on all the various WhatsApp groups and Facebook pages, and I'm the only guy. There are no others."
Yeah. So. Yeah.
Sorry, Kate. Yet again, you've asked a question. I've given you a really long.
No, but I think it is really important for people to hear that, you clearly are the minority in, the stay-at-home community, which in the scheme of things is not that large to start off with. So now there's another conference you went to in Canada, actually, the side-by-side fatherhood conference last year. Can you tell me a little bit about that conference and, your impressions, and especially as it's, on the other side of the Atlantic, were there differences of opinions or thoughts that you heard there?
Yeah, well, what I would say is that I think you in Canada, you are a few steps ahead of us in the UK. I mean, the conference is organised by Dad Central. I was actually taking part in a panel session that was organised by Movember, the charity Movember, which is an organisation I have some history with. And again, it was a discussion about how fatherhood might look in years to come. Although, I mean, the questions from the audience were much more kind of practical about, had I met fathers who had maybe got divorced and were struggling with the situation and so on. But what really struck me was actually how organised Dad Central were, and how they could actually bring in professionals, from healthcare, social care, mental health care provision, really top-notch academics, actually. And this conference is held, if I remember correctly, so every 2 years. Canada. There is nothing to rival that I know of. Well, actually, I'm going to go a bit further. I'm going to say anywhere in Europe. I don't know if the United States does or Australasia do, but I somehow doubt it. But I think you're actually really pioneering in Canada by having this event.
So in Germany, I was very lucky to attend. It's called the Väter Summit. So it's the Father Summit. It was this January in Berlin. And so it's the organization, what they do is they create father networks in professional organizations, and they work also with the Ministry of Family together. And so these father networks within organizations are basically enabling dads who work to have their own space to be able to talk about issues, situations, and just support each other. And by the same token, because in my mind, in order to get to gender equality, you really need to have both moms and dads and men and women involved. So really to kind of change the discussion inside organizations. And I don't think by having looked at the Father Central or Dad Central, I don't know if that is also like establishing networks of fathers within organizations. I wasn't sure. Did you get the impression that happened?
I think there is. I'm going to say
okay.
But well, firstly, I'm really pleased to see that is happening.
Yes.
In Germany, I think that is incredible, valuable work. And I think what I see, I have a theory about all of this, is that men do not have the same social networks and social connections to call upon that mothers do. And there are some huge systemic issues. Firstly, boys are not raised to be social. Boys are raised to I hesitate to use the word aggressive, but boys are raised to go out and work and provide. Basically, they are provide. If we look at the way boys are raised, the issue, and this causes all sorts of issues with men in later life. They're supposed to be, tough, able to handle all their problems, and not need to speak about it. Which is obviously a horrendous approach to take. And as I said, there's all sorts of problems in later life. But if a man becomes a stay-at-home father, if you look at the pattern that kind of follows, women are encouraged to socialise with each other from before a baby is born. Okay. If you get we have in the UK, the leading organisations, the National Childbirth Trust, they will organise all sorts of events that fathers are invited along to, but men, we're sort of an added extra. Okay?
Right.
They're nice to have. And so women socialise at these events. They then meet at the kindergarten gates and they talk there. And men very rarely become stay-at-home dads until after breastfeeding has finished, obviously.
Right.
So these social networks are already in place. Or if a man is widowed or made redundant, he may become a stay-at-home dad years later, after which women have been socialised. The same groups of women from the same national childbirth or same childbirth associations have been socialising for years and years and years, and then a man has to parachute in and establish himself. And it's actually very difficult. The guy's leading a very lonely life if you are basically the main carer for your kids.
And John, I feel all the things you just described, that's why I feel it's so important that you are very outspoken and you are really like a role model, because honestly, if I were a young dad to be, I might not know where to go. And now, having your blog and being outspoken, I think it really, really helps. And you do the Q&A interview sections on your blog, which I really appreciate. And I was very, impressed that you were talking to Malala's dad, because I really, really feel that, he has been such a great role model in ensuring that his daughter, basically knows she can do anything. And then I saw, as we're talking about flexible work, the interview you had with two male job sharers, Sam White and Will McDonald. And to me, that was also yet another perfect role model, saying to people, yes, you can be a male job sharer. Yes, it is possible for you to have flexible work. So could you tell us a bit more about this, especially, having business leaders listening to our calls and wondering, how is that possible, job sharing, because that's not very common here at all in Canada.
No, well, actually, Will, Will and Sam, they actually stand out in the UK. It's not common in Britain at all. I'm told it's quite common in the Netherlands to have people of that level job sharing. But yeah, I started the Q&A series off. Then I've always had a very loose kind of approach to it, to interview people who have some interest in parenting or health. Basically, these guys, Will and Sam, they're at the director level in a huge insurance company called Aviva. I think it's a multinational, so it might be under different names across the world. But they work at director level at Aviva, and they are job sharing. They're basically job sharing because one of them became a father and didn't want to go back full time, so they managed to arrange their own job share. Now, Aviva is a very forward-looking company. Actually, they do things. They pay maternity and paternity benefits at the same kind of rates and so on. And speaking to people like that really is very inspiring, and I enjoyed it. Interestingly, though, when I launched the Q&A series, I've aimed to produce one interview a week. And for the first couple of months, I sort of looked back at all of the people I'd interviewed, and it just looked slightly unfortunate because they were all white, middle-aged men wearing some version of a suit, maybe not with a tie, but you know. And I was back and I thought, you know, I'm really going to have to diversify the people I'm speaking to. But the thing that was actually really sad was that every one of these guys I was speaking to was actually doing something really pioneering. They were maybe blazing a trail in childcare as a childcare worker, or they were working at director level in job sharing. But I thought, yeah, I'm really going to have to diversify. So anyway, it's sort of worked out its own pattern now. I mean, I speak to all sorts of people. I'm really blessed with the people who I have had a chance to speak to. And Ziauddin Yousafzai, who is Malala's dad, just amazing guy, actually. Such a nice man. And it was only when I did that Q&A that I truly appreciated his background and what he'd done. And if you are not familiar with the Malala story, obviously an amazing girl. She's just graduated from Oxford University. In politics, philosophy, and economics, which is the classic Oxford degree. But her father had been a huge campaigner for equality in education throughout his life. Obviously received death threats from the Taliban, all sorts during that horrendous era. But just wonderful girl. In fact, the other day, my daughter had to was asked to doing some of the online schooling, and the kids have been doing. They were asked to do something about Malala, and I sent Ziauddin a text message saying, "Oh, look what my daughter's doing." He's so good. He actually recorded a WhatsApp audio message just for my daughter to say, so wonderful to see that you're studying Malala and you are such an inspiring young girl. Made her day.
That I can only imagine. That's just, it's, I read about his own story and how he always felt that as a young boy, he was getting preferential treatment over his own sisters. And that's why he wanted to ensure that in his own family life that wouldn't happen. So that's just amazing. It really is. About job sharing, yes, I've interviewed several people about job sharing, and Switzerland also is very, very big. In the UK, actually, there is Maggie Piggott, who was a job sharer with the same person for 23 years. And they got promoted several times within these 23 years. And yeah, so I think with job sharing, and I just think it needs to be much more well known, because I think it is an amazing model, but it's simply, I don't know, it has not, in my mind, received an amount of, publicity that it should be receiving. And I interviewed also Sarah Horsfall of Genie Bee in the UK, who focuses on helping organizations to do job sharing. So yeah, so I'm very appreciative that you had 2 male job sharers. Now, one question I really have been looking forward to asking you, because I'm a huge LinkedIn fan. So first of all, I wanted to congratulate you on becoming a LinkedIn Changemaker. And then I would love to find out more of what that entails and how this all happened.
Well, yes. So LinkedIn Changemaker, I have to run a sales pitch here and say, follow me on LinkedIn. You'll find me as John Adams, Dadbloguk UK. So there are 7 of us, 7 LinkedIn Changemakers.
Okay.
And we are working with LinkedIn on a year-long project to basically change the workforce.
Okay.
And modern working practices. And there are a variety of different individuals involved. There's an LGBT campaigner who's obviously looking to diversify the workforce and make it more accessible and friendly and accepting of our gay friends. There is an inclusivity campaigner, a wonderful woman who is a black Muslim from Australia, who works in engineering.
Wow.
And just wants to tear down all the barriers, and quite rightly so. There's a mental health campaigner who, very sadly, his brother ended his own life, and he's campaigning to get mental health training into the workplace. There is another individual who's trying to get businesses to basically stop relying so heavily on single-use plastics. Myself, I am campaigning to make flexible working much more available to mums, dads, and carers, basically. Anyone with care responsibility. Now, I say that I do want that applied equally, but I do have to mention that all the statistics show that if a man applies for flexible working, his request is twice as likely to be turned down as a woman's, because we have this culture whereby flexible working is generally for mothers, and then maybe later on in life for women who are fulfilling a caring role, looking for older relatives and so on. Obviously COVID-19 has been a horrendous experience for all of us.
Yep.
But the one thing COVID has done, is demonstrated that flexible remote working works. We had the chief executive officer of Barclays Bank just a couple of months ago. He said the days of having an office with 7,000 people in it through. He said Barclays Bank has operated just fine with staff working from their own kitchens. Now, it's possibly unrealistic to think that we are all going to be working from home 5 days a week forever, but if we can at least change things so that we are working from home 2 days a week, 3 days a week, or where feasible, the office is a place that we go into once a fortnight. Yeah, the lack of commute has instant environmental benefits. The academic research I mentioned earlier, there's evidence that people are eating healthier, there's evidence that people are exercising more, and there is, of course, a lot of evidence that men are much more involved with their families. This, in turn, takes the pressure and burden off of women, or some of the pressure and burden off of women. So we start having a bit. Okay, we're not perfect. We're not perfect, but we start having a society where the domestic burden is that bit fairer. So I'm passionate about it. I really am. And I just hope that LinkedIn Changemakers can push this change and really see flexible working being much more active. And the beautiful thing, of course, is that we've had men working at home for months now. So hopefully that ridiculous barrier where we just assume flexible working was for women have gone. I hope, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean that just sounds such an important initiative, and maybe I could give my own little pet peeve for LinkedIn, or like what I find really tricky is when you look at the section where one puts like sort of the resume, so to speak, on LinkedIn. If one has been a stay-at-home parent or in general an unpaid caregiver, people literally sometimes spend hours deciding, should I leave a gap? Should I, say CEO of the house, etc., etc. But what, for example, if somebody works for a large multinational organization, they can just click and say, okay, I've worked for this big multinational organization. And then instantly it says, so and so many other thousands of employees, so one can connect. So in my mind, if the LinkedIn had some type of system where it's like, sort of like quote unquote a fake company that it says literally unpaid carer or something, and you could use that as a drop down box, it would systemize it much more easily, but also it would create instantaneously a much larger community on LinkedIn where people in a similar experience could communicate with each other, and maybe even see within their local area, say, oh, there are 10 other people who have gone through that experience. That's just something I would love to see. And I know that, and if you look at my LinkedIn profile, you see it's called the Pregnancy Pass, and it's basically an ad organization in the US who tried to make that point by creating a fictitious company to allow people to use that. But obviously, as it's called the Pregnancy Pass, it's rather limiting. It doesn't take into account male carers, for example, and but I think from an idea perspective, I thought it was a good idea.
Well, no, I mean that is a good idea, and I am going to be, I'm setting up a LinkedIn community where such matters can actually be discussed. So when I've got that up and running, Karen, I'll be coming to you and I'll be saying, get that in writing for me, and then I can feed it back.
That would be.
And the one thing I will say with my deed with LinkedIn is, wow, do they take feedback seriously? So that's actually really interesting a point. I can't say that I've personally experienced that with LinkedIn, but if I've ever tried to renew an insurance policy or something like that, then it asks for your your occupation.
Right.
Try putting down that you're a male carer. 9 times out of 10, you have to go for housewife, which is a horrible phrase.
No, but you're absolutely right. I feel it's like there is mainstream, and as soon as you're outside of what is the typical perception, right, then I so now, like, I could just listen to you forever, John. So I know we're coming to an end of our conversation, and I'm super appreciative that you have created such a great role model for other dads to be a stay-at-home dad with your blog and book and online presence. And now, for any business leader who is listening to the episode, and what message do you have that you would like to leave with them, as far as flexible work, being a stay-at-home parent?
What a question. I think my real message to business leaders, and I think this is the absolute perfect time to get it across because of COVID is flexible remote working is not something to fear. Okay. Now, I may have missed something. I may have missed news reports. I have seen absolutely nothing in the media about lost productivity over the past 3 months, or certainly nothing about lost productivity caused by staff working from home. Okay. I've read a lot about, lost spending and so on and so forth, but nothing about staff work. Do not fear it. I suppose the other point I would make is just reflecting what's happened over the past few months is they are not typical work from home patterns, because parents of school age children, or even if your children are not yet school age, there's been no childcare.
Right.
This has not been a typical situation. If you remove that element, flexible working and remote working becomes so much easier. Trust me, it really does. And also, you have to accept the fact that staff have caring responsibilities, and I hate to be gendered about this, but there is a widespread acceptance about the fact that mums and women are carers. Actually, if I put this into a UK context, 8% of all single parent families are headed by men. Now that's a minority, but that's if I remember correctly, that's in the hundreds of thousands.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's a sizable minority. You've then got to add on top of that, the stay-at-home dads. You've then got to add the divorced parents who are sharing custody, well. So you need to accept that your families do have caring responsibilities, which is another actual fringe benefit of the COVID situation, is that this has hit employers square in the face. They've had to accept the fact that their employees are homeschooling and working, which is not ideal. Nobody wants that. It's very, very big. The other thing I would say is, well, actually, I'm going to give a message to employees, if that's okay.
Yes.
It will
please.
It will depend on maybe your nation state or your state, but something that we're always keen to get across in Britain is flexible working is actually your legal right.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't be thinking that your employer is doing you a favour. They're not. This has been well established. Sorry, going back to employers, there's one other point that I really, really should make, is that I've made this time and again. I am a Generation X man. I couldn't get the flexibility I wanted from the workforce, and I walked from the workforce. Now, I appreciate this is an audio podcast, so your listeners can't see this, but I've got back here my wall of awards here, which I know that's not meant to sound arrogant, but I've got various awards up here that I've won. Blogging has taken me from Australia to Canada and various places in between. I've interviewed people like Steve Carell and Michael Douglas. I've had a blast. I've loved it. Now, that is talent that I could have given an employer. Because I couldn't get flexibility, it's mine and no one else is getting it. So I think employers need to think, be flexible, or the talented staff are going to walk. And I apologise, that may make me sound incredibly arrogant, but it's a point I feel that has to be made.
I completely appreciate your message, and I feel also that more and more the younger generations are looking for more flexible work, even more so than maybe the previous generation X or baby boomers. And so in order to retain and attract top talent, I truly believe flexibility in many forms needs to be added to a employees' options or choices. Yeah.
Oh, no, the evidence is there already. There was a study done in the UK last year, I think it might have been the year before, done by an organisation called Daddy Life. The Millennial Dad at Work report, it's called. Now, this wasn't a wide-scale study. It was a study of an interview, really, with the 2,000 fathers. A third of the guys interviewed had left their job within a year of becoming a father because they couldn't get the flexibility they wanted. And a further third were looking for another job.
Yeah.
Nothing else needs to be said. Generation X, I'm a rarity. For the millennials, they won't think twice. They're going to walk.
I agree. Now, is there anything else that we have not addressed in our interview that you would like to make sure our listeners know about?
Well, as you're in Canada, I would just like to show my appreciation for Canadian pilots, because when I last flew into Canada, it was during the mother of all snowstorms. Tim Hortons double. I don't know how much you should be. You get into those things, but the calorie count is absolutely phenomenal. What else can I say? No, just thanks ever so much for having me on. I would say be flexible, enjoy parenthood. If you're not a parent and you're a carer, enjoy being a carer. And it's not easy. These aren't, but yeah. Well, I suppose, look, we're in Corona time. I've got to say, stay safe. Look after yourself, really.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful having you on the show. Now, the one last thing is, where can people find you?
Okay, well, the blog, the mothership, you'll find me at dadbloguk.com. On Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, you will find me at Dadbloguk. You will also find me on TikTok.
Oh, wow.
UK. Am I on any of the social media channels? Good grief, I've got to think. LinkedIn, well, of course, I've mentioned it already. I'm not going to say it again. You'll find me John Adams, Dadbloguk. Who knows? Maybe next year I'll be at Dance Central again. Who knows? I'd love to be there. It was a great experience. But my word, it was quite interesting being in Ottawa and seeing Ottawa working. I mean, in the UK, you get a millimetre of snow and they shut the schools and everything.
Right.
Snow.
Yeah, it certainly is different. I was in London many years ago, and as you said, it was like maybe a centimeter, if that, and basically a radio saying, okay, everybody who can stay at home, please do stay at home, because this is not something that the system is coping very well. Well, thank you so much again, John, for being on the show. I so appreciate having you.
No, it's great. Thanks again, Karen, and yes, my love to Canada.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the show. We hope you gained valuable insights and new ideas. To keep listening to future episodes, please head over to iTunes or your favorite player and subscribe and give it a rating. We would very much appreciate a review and for you to share it on social media, so more people can start innovating in how they offer employment. Until the next time, goodbye!